Welcome to this explainer. Today we're taking some incredibly dense, albeit fascinating, academic research from a team of psychological scientists and breaking it down into a really clear look at how human beings actually gain influence and power within groups. So, if you've ever wondered why the quiet expert and the loud bully both somehow manage to end up in charge, well, you're in the exact right place. We're going to map out the exact science of social hierarchy.
To kick things off, we've got to ask what seems like an impossible question. How on earth could two completely opposite types of leaders both reach the absolute pinnacle of corporate success? We usually assume there's just one right way to climb the ladder, right? But history actually tells a very different story.
Just look at this stark, real-world contrast. On the left, we've got Henry Ford II, who built Ford into a massive global powerhouse from 1945 to 1980. His own employees literally described him as a terrorizing dictator. He was known for erratic outbursts, humiliating people at will, and if anyone challenged him, he'd just say, "My name is on the building." Yet, he was an enormously successful CEO. Now over on the right, we have Warren Buffett, famously known as the Oracle of Omaha. He's extraordinarily respected, right? He subtly steers decisions without micromanaging, and people will literally travel across the entire country just to seek his wisdom. So two completely different paths to the exact same high-status outcome.
Okay, to understand how this is scientifically possible, we first need to define our terms. Researchers call the first strategy dominance, and this is an evolutionary behavioral strategy based purely on wielding control, force, and inducing fear. Now, it's absolutely crucial to point out that we are completely removing moral judgment here. We aren't saying this is good or bad, we're just looking at it objectively, as an adaptive mechanism. In nature, dominant individuals create fear in subordinates by unpredictably threatening to withhold resources, and while the subordinates just comply to safeguard their own well-being.
But there is a second, completely parallel strategy, and that is prestige. While dominance is something we share with other primates, prestige is likely totally unique to us humans. It relies on others willingly granting respect in exchange for valuable cultural knowledge or skills. Basically, subordinates actually seek out prestigious individuals. They defer to them voluntarily because they want to learn, emulate, and copy that superior know-how.
Historically, scientists debated endlessly between these two conflicting ideas. The competence-based account argued that rank relies strictly on superior skills, altruism, and making real contributions to the group. Essentially, the idea was that you can't just bully your way to the top. Conversely, the conflict-based account argued the exact opposite, that human hierarchy is fundamentally built on overt threats, physical attacks, and aggressive dominance. But today, we're going to look at concrete evidence proving that neither of these theories alone tells the whole story.
And here is the real breakthrough. It turns out our brains are actually hardwired by evolution to submit to threats and, at the exact same time, defer to expertise. The researchers proposed this completely new dual pathway model. They argued that dominance and prestige are independent, coexisting avenues to influence. You can use one, you can use the other, or, depending on the situation, a person might even use both.
Let's move on to part 1, the moon survival experiment, and see how researchers actually tested this. To test this dual pathway theory, the researchers needed to see if strangers would naturally form hierarchies in real time. So imagine yourself in this exact room. You're taking part in what's called the Lost on the Moon survival simulation, sitting right alongside total strangers. You're seated at a table. Camera lenses are pointed at you from both sides, and you have to figure out how to survive a hypothetical lunar crash landing. Talk about pressure, right? The researchers used these specific steps to track whose answers the group ultimately adopted. First up, every individual privately ranked 15 survival items, things like oxygen tanks and signal flares. Next, the group had 20 minutes to debate and finalize a single collective list. By calculating how closely the group's final list matched an individual's private list, the researchers got an objective mathematical measure of behavioral influence. They could literally see who organically steered the group's decisions. And finally, the participants rated each other on dominance, prestige, and overall influence. Now, when we look at the data across 36 different groups of strangers, it visually proves the theory. Just look at those upward trend lines. Whether we track dominance on the top or prestige on the bottom, the result is the same. As the behavior goes up, perceived influence goes up. Outside observers who watched the tapes agreed, and the objective behavioral data totally backed it up. Both the intimidating bully and the helpful expert objectively bent the group's final decisions to their will.
Which brings us to part 2, tracking the room's attention.
Now, influence isn't just about whose ideas we eventually adopt on paper. It's also heavily tied to who we literally look at in a room. To track this, they had unacquainted observers wear advanced eye-tracking devices and watch randomized 20-second video clips of the group interactions from that first study. And because the clips were completely out of order, the observers couldn't just follow the logical flow of the conversation. They were reacting purely to the raw behavioral signals of the people on the screen. The results from the eye trackers came down to one fascinating metric: 2%. This specific number is a huge deal because it shows us exactly how powerfully both of these strategies command our literal visual attention in a room, regardless of who is currently talking.
The core finding here is perfectly balanced. A 1-point increase in a target's perceived dominance or a 1-point increase in their perceived prestige resulted in an identical 2% increase in visual fixations from the observers. And, evolutionarily, this makes complete sense. People will automatically stare at a jerk out of an ingrained fear of unexpected attacks. You have to monitor the threat in the room, right? Conversely, people stare at the saint, the prestigious expert, to carefully monitor and learn from them. So the visual attention is exactly the same, but the underlying psychological motivation is entirely different.
And that brings us to our final section, Part 3, the likability paradox.
So, if both strategies work equally well for gaining influence and attention, you might be wondering, why not just use dominance all the time? Well, let's dive into this table, because the answer lies in how these paths completely diverge when it comes to making friends. Prestigious individuals are highly liked by their peers. They build alliances. Dominant individuals, on the other hand, are actively disliked by outside observers and are for sure not building warm, fuzzy friendships with their peers.
This right here is the likability paradox. Past theories always assumed you had to be liked to be influential, but this research proves that absolutely false. Dominance works as a highly effective strategy to gain power and steer group decisions completely in spite of the fact that people actively dislike the dominant person. Crazy, right? Interpersonal liking is simply not a requirement for holding social rank.
Ultimately, the researchers leave us with this profound takeaway. Because humans are primates who instinctively avoid agonistic battles, and because we are cultural beings who completely rely on sharing knowledge to survive, our psychology is naturally dual-pronged. We are physically built and mentally hardwired to follow both the dictator who uses fear and the sage who commands respect. We yield to Henry Ford II, and we defer to Warren Buffett.
Since we all naturally want to be heard, and we all have to navigate the hierarchies of our own families, social circles, and careers, let me leave you with this final provocative thought. Knowing that the science proves both methods are highly effective, which of these two strategies are you using to ascend the hierarchy in your own workplace? Are you leading through the power of your shared expertise or the sharp edge of your intimidation? Thank you for exploring the science of social hierarchy with me in this explainer. Keep analyzing the dynamics around you, and I'll catch you next time.